So we talk a lot on this channel about how you are God, but how can you know that you are God? How can you realize that you are God? And today we're going to be taking a look at the concept of non-dualism, an idea that's gaining a lot of popularity in spirituality and mysticism and New Age circles today. And it comes from Eastern philosophy, Eastern mysticism, this idea of non-dualism. But not only are we taking a look at non-dualism and the secrets it holds pertaining to you being God, but we're also taking a look at something called absolute idealism. Now, absolute idealism is a system that comes from the West, rooted in Western philosophy and even influenced by Hermeticism and different mystical Western systems. So we're going to be taking a look at systems that have developed in very different ways that both say the same things, but have very different methods for understanding that you are God. The non-dualism of the East and the absolute idealism of the West. And we're going to be seeing how to combine the two together into a full and total understanding of what you are. And that is, of course, God. So let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at non-dualism. We're going to be taking, like I said, take a look at non-dualism and absolute idealism. That's what we're doing here today, seeing how it pertains to you being God. But before we do, just make sure that you hit like and subscribe, because remember, this channel is about raising consciousness. And when you hit like and subscribe, it tells the algorithm to spread this around. More people see it, and we can reach more people. So please take a minute to do that right now. It takes just a second, helps out a lot. Also, if you want to see my channel grow and help me create bigger and better videos and more content, then support over on Patreon, patreon.com/MorgueOfficial, and you'll get access to all of our members only videos. There's a new one every single week, and we're having one right after this, and it's a good one. It's Did the Ancient Humans Hear the Voices of the Gods? We're going to be exploring that idea. It's going to be very interesting. So just support at patreon.com/MorgueOfficial at any tier, or tier 2 or higher right here on YouTube by hitting the join button right below this video. Also, be aware there's a lot of scammers in the comments pretending to be me, saying to join my WhatsApp, join my Telegram. Just don't fall for it. I don't have a WhatsApp. I don't have a Telegram. That's not me. There are also people and groups out there who don't like what I'm doing and don't like what we are doing and are spreading a lot of misinformation and disinformation about me and our group. So as always, just don't fall for the BS. Use your head, use logic and reason. All right, here we go, my friends. We're talking about how to understand that you are God, because this is what it's all about. This is what reality is. We are God exploring itself through itself. As Alan Watts said, I'm paraphrasing, but we are God pretending that it is not. We are in this eternal cycle of existence. And right now we are at the point in reality where we are beginning to remember what we are. But how does one truly begin to understand this? And we'll see that people have been trying to understand this for thousands of years, and it's developed a certain way in the East known as non-dualism. That's what we're going to be exploring. And as also absolute idealism, which developed in the West. And we're going to see they're coming at it from different angles, but we need to combine the two together. Just like the right hemisphere of the brain and the left hemisphere of the brain aren't enemies, the ideas of the West and the ideas of the East aren't enemies either. They need to be synthesized. They need to work together. And it's really unfortunate that that hasn't become something that's really typically understood. Usually those who have Eastern ideologies look down on Western methods, and those who are of the West look down on Eastern methods. That's not always the case, but it's pretty often that that occurs. When that's not right at all, it needs to be combined together into a higher synthesis, which is of course what we do in the Neogenian system, which is what we will be talking about as well. But let's take a look at this idea of non-dualism. What is non-dualism exactly? Now, to get a better understanding of this, we are going to be reading some excerpts from an article on medium.com called, appropriately enough, What is Non-Dualism? And this is by Beth Bradford, PhD. So if you enjoy some of the excerpts that we read from this, go to medium.com and support Beth Bradford. Give her a follow. And let's just take a look and see what she has to say here, and we'll understand non-dualism a little better, and then begin to understand what this says about you being God, and bring in the concept of absolute idealism as well. So Beth says a concept that's gathering traction is non-dualism. It's definitely not new, but I'm seeing some Instagram posts, courses, and lectures centering on this subject of non-dualism. And that's absolutely right. Non-dualism is not new, but it's beginning to become more popular. Some of these Eastern systems, some of these Eastern ideas are gaining traction in a lot of New Age and spiritual ideologies. And this is both a good thing and a bad thing. And the good thing about it is that there's a lot of interesting information in these teachings that can be helpful. The negative part about it is that it's sometimes interpreted incorrectly or in very strange ways. New Age spirituality tends to take ideas and twist them into some weird expressions. That's not always the case. Sometimes they hit the nail on the head, but oftentimes it can get a little strange. Also, the other unfortunate part is that they tend to ignore the whole Western aspect as well, which is what we'll be talking about in terms of absolute idealism, where we need to have both, we need to understand both. But so what is non-dualism, though? Let's start with that. So Beth writes, non-dualism in the context of spirituality or theology refers to the idea that there is no fundamental distinction or separation between the divine, the self, and the rest of existence. It is a perspective that transcends dualities such as subject and object, self and other, or sacred and profane. We're all swimming in the same soup. So non-dualism is the idea that we are all divinely one and interconnected, and that separation is an illusion. Now, I just want to point out something real quick, is that some people ask about the difference between non-dualism and something known as monism. So monism is an important idea, but non-dualism and monism are different. So non-dualism is about the idea that everything is interconnected and one. Monism is the idea that there is a single substance, a single thing that reality is composed of. So for example, in our Neogenian system, it is an idealist monism, meaning idealism meaning mind, monism meaning one thing. There is only one thing, and that one thing is mind. That's what that means. But a monism doesn't have to be idealism. It can also be materialism. The idea that reality is just material and that's it, that's also a monism. So, and of course, in materialism, things absolutely can be separate. There is a lot of separation in materialism. So monism is about what reality is made of and saying that it's made of a singular substance. And non-dualism, however, is a different concept, which says that everything is interconnected and one. You can see there's a little bit of crossover there, but they are different concepts. So long story short, what is non-dualism? Non-dualism is the idea that there's no fundamental distinction between the divine, the self, and the rest of existence, as Beth defines it here in her article. So non-dualistic traditions often assert that the ultimate reality is a unified, undivided whole, and any apparent distinctions or separations are illusions. The term non-dual is derived from the Sanskrit word advaita, which means not to, or non-dual. So this is going to be very important to understand, because it's very interesting when you get the Eastern side of things. The East is very much associated with unity. The East is very much associated with wholeness, whereas the West tends to chop things up into little pieces. They're about analyzing things in terms of sequential ordered structures, whether it's like Greek atomism, where you're dividing reality into atoms, or Leibnizian monads, where you are dividing reality into mental units, or many different ideas in the West have to do with having things be in pieces. So we already see a big distinction here, and it's very interesting that this parallels the associated functions with the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain. The right hemisphere is associated with holistic understanding things in terms of the wholeness. It's also associated with meaning, whereas the left hemisphere of the brain is associated with things with like logic and mathematics and sequential ideas, sequencing. So again, very interesting how the right and the left hemisphere of the brain parallels in many different ways the development of Eastern and Western philosophies. Now, of course, we have to generalize a lot. There's a lot of different exceptions to this, but as always, we want to combine these ideas together to create a unified whole. And we'll be talking about that today as well. Like, is it true? Is it true that reality is an undivided singular whole? Is that true? That's what non-dualism says. Is that true? We're going to be answering that question. So it says that several religious and philosophical traditions incorporate non-dualist perspectives, and these ideas are found in various forms across different cultures. And here are a few examples. So Advaita Vedanta, a school of Hindu philosophy that emphasizes the non-dual nature of reality. It teaches that Brahman, which is the ultimate reality or absolute, important word, absolute, because we're going to be talking about absolute idealism, is the only true existence, and individual souls, Atman, are ultimately identical to Brahman. So Advaita Vedanta says that all reality is Brahman. Brahman is the ultimate reality, and Brahman is usually thought of in terms of a consciousness. And Atman, which is the self, is on a mission to realize that it is in fact actually Brahman. That's what Advaita Vedanta teaches. So then we have things like Zen Buddhism, which is about direct experience and paradoxical statements. There's Taoism, which the Tao or the way is the ultimate non-dual reality that underlies and unifies all existence. There's some Christian mysticism that talks about the union with the divine, and so non-dualism invites practitioners to go beyond ordinary conceptual thinking. All right, so here's the important part, and what I really want to emphasize here. So Beth writes, this is critical here. This is the crux here. Beth writes, non-dualism invites practitioners to go beyond ordinary conceptual thinking and experience a direct, unmediated awareness of the unity that underlies all of existence. It is often associated with deep spiritual realization, liberation, and a profound shift in one's perception of reality. Pretty cool, right? While I find all this stuff pretty interesting, mostly because it shows how many religions share the same core, intellectualizing about non-dualism defeats the purpose. It's about using logic to describe something spiritual. The rational intellectual mind likes to make distinctions between things to learn and make sense of what we see and experience. In other words, the rational mind lives in the realm of dualism, so do we. Okay, so this is something I absolutely disagree with. And this is the problem here, where non-dualism, yes, it's about the direct experience of existence. It's about the direct experience of reality. And we need to have that. We need to incorporate that. That's very important. But the idea that the rational or intellectual mind is mired in the world of separation and can't access unity, that's a fundamentally false premise here. And that's where absolute idealism comes in. Because one of the very important founders of absolute idealism, the philosopher Hegel, talked about exactly this. So talked about two kind of different types of reason. He talked about one kind of reason called the understanding, which is a term used by Kant. And Kant had a very similar idea to this, in that Kant believed that reason couldn't access the true reality. But what Hegel said was that it's not that reason can't access the true reality, it's the understanding that can't access true reality. And the understanding is about sort of like the human method in which it uses reason in a certain way. But reason itself can access the true reality because reason itself is able to unify distinctions together into a singular thing. Reason, when it's used properly, when it's understood what it in terms of what it is able to actually unify distinctions together. And I'll show you an example of that. We can see the example of that in the mathematical statement 1 minus 1 equals 0. So if we take a look at that mathematical statement, 1 minus 1 equals 0, on one side, we have a dualistic situation where you have a positive and a negative. You have one positive piece of information, and you want to have one negative piece of information, but that is equal to 0, which is a fundamental unity, which is a unity of the two. So when reason is applied properly, it is actually able to reconcile opposites into a unity. And this is what's really important, where we have to realize that the methods that we use are for different modes of understanding. Having a direct experience of reality as being one is very important. But having a rational understanding of that is also important. It's kind of like the difference between going out and experiencing the world. And of course, that's really important. You'll be able to experience love and pain and pleasure and heartbreak and all the different aspects that you have with experiencing the world. And then there is science, which is about examining that world and how that world operates. And you need both. If you had no experience of the world and just did dry science, that would be a terrible kind of existence. And if you just had pure experience without ever any kind of understanding of how the world works, you would be very limited in the modes of existence that you could operate in, and having a clear and lucid understanding of existence, which leads to, greater developments in the experiences that we can have. Because of science, we're able to have a great diversity of experiences. We can extend our lives. We're so many different types of technologies we can interact with. I'm able to talk to you right now because of technology. It expands the experiences that we can have because of our understanding of it. All right. So when it comes to the sort of Eastern idea of direct experience and the more Western idea of rational analysis, these are not enemies. And it's always very frustrating to me when these schools of thought, not always, but typically see each other as being enemies. Whereas, it's about direct experience, reason can't, access this, or people who are into rational analysis will be like, it's all about rational analysis. Direct experiences isn't actually helpful or useful at all. That's not true. They're both extremely important, just like the right hemisphere of the brain and the left hemisphere of the brain must work together, synergized, to interpret reality and for us to be able to have meaningful experiences of existence and to improve our understanding. So what is absolute idealism? So non-dualism, right? So the important things about non-dualism here is that non-dualism is all about direct experience, direct experience of unity, and that it's not about intellectual understanding or conceptual thought. It's about this direct experience. Okay. So the way that one usually does this is like through different spiritual practices like meditation, contemplation, and a lot of people will also have these experiences through psychedelic experiences. And every time I mention psychedelics, always remember, don't do anything dangerous or illegal, always be responsible, always be safe. But altered states of consciousness is usually the method used to have this direct experience of unity. And you can dissolve the boundaries between things like self and other, the observer and the observed, and reveal this underlying reality that we are all a part of. But here's the interesting thing. Absolute idealism is very similar, but it comes and approaches the understanding of it in a completely different way. See, absolute idealism is about understanding reality through reason, But the understanding of reality through reason involves recognizing the interconnectedness and unity of everything. And the ultimate goal of absolute idealism is the union of subject and object, where the subject realizes that the object is just the subject externalized, and there is no actual fundamental difference between the two. So absolute idealism is also about understanding that everything is interconnected and everything is united. However, it doesn't approach it through having direct experience. This understanding is about engaging with ideas, philosophical understanding, and ultimately reason. So it's about understanding these ideas through reason. So what absolute idealism actually sees, especially in terms of Hegelian philosophy, it sees reality as being a single mind known as the absolute. And this single mind is a structure of reason. It's a rational structure. So what does that mean exactly? That can seem really abstract for a lot of people, but a good way to understand it is kind of like a computer code. A computer code is a rational structure. And if you combine that rational structure in certain ways, you can generate video game worlds. So Hegel looked at, in his absolute idealism, as reality being like a mind that was a rational structure organizing itself into different modes of experience. So the absolute, or God, is a single unity that is structuring itself in terms of being a rational system, meaning it follows rules and order. And one of the modes of its expressions is nature. In other words, it generates the natural world, the physical universe, from itself, from its own rational structure, just like a video game code might generate a video game reality. And ultimately what happens is that we are existing in this video game reality. But because everything is the absolute, because everything is God, that means that we are the consciousness of the absolute. We are the consciousness of God, or what Hegel calls spirit. Spirit, or our consciousness, is the absolute's consciousness. And as we come to realize what we are through various different modes of understanding, Hegel believed that the highest mode of understanding was reason, because reality itself is a rational structure. And so we're accessing our understanding of ourselves through reason, and we come to the rational understanding that we are God. So you see, there are two different ways to look at it here. In non-dualism, you're having a direct experience of understanding that everything is interconnected through like a meditative state or a psychedelic experience, some altered state of consciousness. You're having the experience of everything being unified. In absolute idealism, you're working it out through reason. You're not having a direct experience. You're realizing, based on the properties of existence, the properties of logic, the properties of reason, you are coming to the realization that, oh, this is how reality has to be. This is the only way reality can be. This is the only way reality must be. Therefore, you come to the rational understanding that everything is interconnected and everything is unified and that we are one. So do you see the difference there? There are two ways of coming to the realization of unity, and both of them are important. They're not enemies of each other. And this is why in the Neogenian system, we synthesize these two perspectives. So in our system, to attain the highest form of consciousness pertaining to individual consciousness, which is hyper-awareness, we use three methods: metacognition, concept networking, and phenomenological experience. So the first two are more about rational understanding. Metacognition is thought thinking about itself. It's about reflecting on the different properties of existence, the different properties of ourselves, the different properties of reason. It's just about explicit self-reflection. And since all reality is the self, that also entails the structure of existence. Higher degrees of metacognition, and then concept networking. When concept networking is about rationally understanding how every system of reality interconnects and forms a united whole. So these would be the two methods that are based on reason. Now the third, phenomenological experience, that's where the methods of a more non-dualistic approach would be applied, where one engages in a meditative state, a safe, legal, and responsible psychedelic state, or whatever form of altered experience one would have to have that direct experience of reality. Because both of these things are very important. So you can kind of understand that, like, if a video game character were in the video game world, they could work out that a code has to exist for the video game to work without having an experience of some kind. So do you see, these are very two different ways of approaching the idea that reality is an interconnected unity. Now, this is important because they both have pros and cons here. The direct experience of reality is very powerful, and it's easier to attain because altered states of consciousness are easier than the large amount of work that rational understanding takes. Most people don't like doing that sort of thing. But both are very important, because where direct experience might be very powerful and it's very important, however, it can get a lot of things wrong. Because when you're having a direct experience of existence, existence doesn't always present itself to you in a very straightforward way or the way that it actually is. The unconscious is filled with symbolism and allegory and metaphor. Remember, it's very much associated with the right hemisphere of the brain, which is associated with meaning and symbolism and narratives and stories. So it's not always going to present things to you in a very straightforward way, which is why you have to use reason to understand exactly how reality works. And this is why we need to have both aspects to truly know what we are. So, for example, when we have the idea, and again, it's very much like the difference between going out and experiencing the world and then engaging in science, understanding the way the world works. This is why in the Neogenian system, we engage in Metarationalism, understanding the metaphysical domain rationally. See, we are here to elevate humanity's consciousness, to literally create a new beginning, a new era in humanity. And to be able to do this, we have to recognize that the metaphysical domain is a real domain. And because we need to recognize that the metaphysical domain is a real domain, we need to begin to study it and understand it in a rational way, just like science understands the physical reality. In other words, we need to begin to take this seriously. Having direct experiences are very important and very powerful, but we need to begin to understand how the metaphysical domain operates. Thus, we'll be able to make vast improvements in our consciousness and our technology. And that's exactly what we do in Metarationalism, where we understand existence to be a collection of frequency patterns, and we can understand the way these frequency patterns work and interact in terms of Fourier mathematics and holographic theory. And by understanding how these systems interact in a rational way, we can begin to understand how reality operates. So what I mean by that is, imagine a time where we can start developing, let's say, technology to tune into different domains of reality. If we just have experiences all day, that's great, that's fine, but it's not going to give us an understanding where we can begin to develop, let's say, technologies that will allow us to access other domains of existence in a controlled way. So for example, when we start to understand how reality works in a mathematical way, because this is a mathematical reality, because reality is frequency, and frequency is simply a mathematical concept. So this is a mathematical existence. So when we understand that reality is a mathematical existence, we can begin to understand the mathematics of the metaphysical domain and how exactly it operates. And when we understand how it exactly operates, we can begin to develop, let's say, technologies, for example, to expand the filter of the brain and develop a tuning system to be able to tune into different patterns of reality, just like how you might change a channel on a streaming service or something like that. We'll be able to select for different areas of reality. And so we'll be able to map out and understand the metaphysical domain in a rational way and begin to make, just like science allowed us to make great strides in the physical domain, such as through medicine and technologies that apply to the physical reality, we can do the same thing in terms of the non-physical reality. But we have to be able to do so in a way where we're understanding it rationally and rigorously. We can't just rely on experience all the time. But experience is also extremely important for understanding what it is like to be reality. So long story short, all these things, all these elements have to work together in unison to give you a whole picture of reality. If science never developed and we were just having experiences all day long, we'd have a very poor understanding of existence. So while we can have experiences of the metaphysical domain all day long, and they can be very rewarding, just like experiences in the physical domain can be very rewarding, to be able to make advances and expand our fields of experience, we have to have a rational understanding of this as well. So this is why something like non-dualism of the East and the absolute idealism of the West are not enemies, but in fact should be integrated. And that's exactly what we do in the Neogenian system, where we discuss hyper-awareness and coming to hyper-awareness through metacognition and concept networking, which is about rational analysis, and phenomenological experience, which is about having direct experience of existence. We need to be combining the two together. And you can see how science does a very similar thing, where they will analyze reality and they will also do experiments in existence, which require experience. So there's a lot of similarities there. It's not exactly the same, but we can draw an analogy to it where you have to have both. And it's very unfortunate that a lot of New Age and mystics and Eastern systems might look down on reason, when reason is actually what allows us to understand the metaphysical domain. And it's also very unfortunate that people who are engaged in reason either use reason incorrectly or look down on experiences and thinking that it doesn't present any sort of benefit to understanding, when absolutely it does. So these two forces are not enemies of each other. They're to be united together into a singular holistic system. And it's silly to think that they're not. It's like thinking that the left and the right hemisphere, if the right and left hemisphere were enemies of each other, it would be impossible. You know, try to imagine walking if you only used your left foot. You're hardly going to be able to get anywhere. You have to use both your right foot and your left foot working together in harmony to make progress. And this is about marrying these two subjects together, and that's exactly what we do in our system. And so another thing that I want to point out here is that, this is all about how you are God. Okay? Now, I want you to think about something. A lot of religions say that God is infinite. And this comes from an idea by Ken Follett, great philosopher. I really like him a lot. So God is infinite. And that's what a lot of religions posit as well. But if you really think about it, right, if you are going to posit that God is infinite, then that means that God is everything. Because if there was anything that was not God, God wouldn't be infinite. So thus to say that there is something that is not God or is not divine is to limit the divine. That means if you want to say that God is infinite and all-pervading, then all things are an expression of God. Thus, we are all expressions of God. Even if we're taking like the typical religious understanding of what God is, if you are saying that God is infinite, there cannot be anything that is not God, because then there would be a limitation to God, and thus God would no longer be infinite, or God would no longer be all. So even in terms of just the basic definitions usually used in religions, logically speaking, we must be God. We have to be God. We cannot not be God. Otherwise, God would be limited and God would not be infinite. There would be something that God is not, which is why most religions are not rational, because they don't understand this idea. You see how we can come to understand, see how we're using reason to come to understanding of certain concepts. And we can understand something like that without having a direct experience. So there's a difference between working out how reality must be, how existence must be, and having a direct experience. And both of those are incredibly important. Now, there's a great quote by Carl Jung, and Carl Jung said, "Intellectualism is a common cover-up for fear of direct experience." And see, that's the problem that you get when you cut out the Eastern idea of experience and you're just about the Western idea of intellectualizing things. Carl Jung is basically saying intellectualism is a common cover-up for fear of having a direct experience. So we don't want to be in either camps. We don't want to be those who just are having direct experiences all the time, but don't have a true rational understanding of what existence is. And then we don't want to be those who rationally analyze existence, but have no idea what it is like to be the absolute, to be reality, for all things to be interconnected, to feel that and know that in a experiential way. And one other thing that I want to point out here, though, another difference between, say, non-dualism and absolute idealism. Absolute idealism is also about an evolving reality. Thus, our understanding of ourselves, of existence, is contributing to the evolution of God, because we are God evolving. So also, and this is where we understand reality rationally as well. So non-dualism says that there's no such thing as separation, that all things are interconnected. Everything is an undivided whole. Now, is that true? Is everything really one? Now, when we start to understand this rationally, when we start to look at this mathematically, we understand that it's actually a little more nuanced than that. So remember the mathematical statement 1 minus 1 equals 0? Well, in that statement, we can see a dualistic mode of reality, and we can also see a unified mode of reality. The 0 is the unified mode of reality that results from opposites within itself. So the truth is that we are all individual souls or individual minds. I don't really like using the word soul. I like using the word mind. We are eternal minds. We are eternal systems of frequency. We are eternal systems of energy. In our system, we call them zetas. We are zetas. We are souls. We are eternal minds, systems of energy, systems of frequency. And so together, as a multiplicity of minds, as a multiplicity of zetas, we form a singular network mind. So the truth is that reality is both one and many at the same time. And really, this is another instance of combining opposites together. You're going to find reality is always about combining opposites together. But what reason shows, what Kant tried to say, oh, look, these are contradictions. And so it shows the limitations of reason. Because Kant would say, look, reason says that reality is one. But if you use reason in another way, it says reality is many. So reason says that reality is one, but it also says reality is many. Look, that's a contradiction. Thus, reason is limited. That's what Kant tried to say. Whereas Hegel came in and said, no, you're just not using reality. You're not using reason properly. And you're not understanding that these opposites can become united. So for example, one and many is not a contradiction. One and many are opposites that can be united. So for example, if you have a network, that is a system that is both one and many. And that's exactly what reality is. Reality is a network mind. It is a singular mind composed of unit minds. Now, these unit minds can arrange themselves into an identity so that they are functionally one, but reality can be both one and many at the same time without being a contradiction. And see, this is what reason allows us to understand. This isn't about, a direct experience. Direct experience can't tell you this sort of thing. This is where reason comes in, and you use logic and deduction to show that one and many is a state that can be actualized together without forming a contradiction, but forming a complete picture of existence. So we together are singular souls, singular minds that form a network mind, that form an interconnected mind, that form a singular mind through our relations to each other. Now, ultimately, we can become an identity and be functionally singular, but so a topic for another day. But the idea here is reality isn't just a singular mind with no differentiation whatsoever. At the point in time that we are right now, reality is differentiated into a multiplicity of eternal minds or eternal subjectivities that together form a singular mind. If that's kind of hard to understand, think of it like a brain and neurons. A brain is a singular structure composed of individual neurons. A brain is both one and many. It is one brain composed of many neurons. Reality is one mind composed of many souls or many zetas. And so that's the problem right now, is that we are a network mind. We are a brain where the individual nodes and neurons, what we are, don't realize that we are a brain or a network mind. So the earth, you can think of the earth as being like a brain. And that's what Nikola Tesla said. Nikola Tesla said, when wireless is developed, reality is going to be interconnected like a brain, and that it is a brain. So, it's not literally in a brain in the way that we think of as a chunk of meat in our head, electrified meat in our, that's not what we're talking about here. But in terms of an interconnected system. So we are an interconnected system. We are like a brain, but the individual neurons, us, aren't working together. For a brain to function properly, the neurons have to work together in a way that is conducive to a healthy operating singular system of the brain. Right now, the earth, all the neurons are effing each other over. They're killing each other. They're starting wars. They're in conflict. So you can imagine the earth right now is like a brain where the neurons are at war with each other instead of working together in a unified, holistic way to create a better world. So that's why it's important to have the understanding of what we are. We need to have an understanding of what we are and an experience of what we are so we can begin to build a world that models how reality operates. We see, reality operates this way. Reality is an interconnected, unified whole. Let's begin to construct our world and construct our reality in that image, in the image of God, but it's us. We are God. In our image, we will construct the world. Our kingdom come, our will be done throughout the world and the universe. That is what we're here to do. We are all citizens of the universe. We're not a citizen of any nation. We're not a citizen of any, we're not, we are citizens of the universe. So it's important to understand, like I said, we need to have direct experience that is typically associated with Eastern ideas, and we need to have the rational understanding which is typically associated with Western ideas. And that's exactly what we do in the Neogenian system with our ideas and hyper-awareness, as well as Metarationalism, where we understand the metaphysical rationally. This is important for having a true, whole understanding of what existence is, so we can begin to build a world that is better for all of us. We can create that unified system. We can create that singular system that is about the individual and the collective, both the one and the many, maximizing the quality of life for all so that we can have a thriving society. That is what we are here to do, and that is what we will do. All right, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe so that we can spread this information around, get more people seeing it. And as always, if you enjoy my work, support over on patreon.com/MorgueOfficial. It helps out a lot. and you'll get access to all of our members only videos. There's a new one every week, and we're having one right now that's about, did humans hear the voices of the gods, as we explore ancient humanity and their idea of having contact with another kind of consciousness. Is that possible? Did it really happen? That's what we're going to be talking about. It's going to be good. So support on Patreon at any tier, or tier 2 or higher right here on YouTube by hitting the join button right below this video. And as always, you know, this isn't church, so don't feel obligated to support monetarily. You don't have to. There are plenty of free ways you can support, but I do appreciate it very much. And I want to shout out those who do support, especially, let's see, Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, the Halloween Mom, DB, Fashida, Enki, Nuselina, Masam, Eric Fire, Christopher Smith, The Eternal Empire, and everyone else. Thank you very much.